This wild thing happened to me a few years back when I was living in Chicago. I had this small apartment in the Lakeview neighborhood, not too far from Wrigley Field. It was a cozy little place, nothing fancy, but it was mine, you know? I'd been there for about a year, and I thought I knew the area pretty well. It was a chilly October night, and I remember because the Cubs had just been knocked out of the playoffs. The whole city was kind of down in the dumps, and there was this gloomy feeling in the air. I'd spent most of the evening binge-watching some true crime documentaries on Netflix. Probably not the smartest choice given what was about to happen. So there I was, sprawled out on my second-hand couch, debating whether to order a late-night pizza or just call it a night. It was around 11 p.m., and I was feeling pretty relaxed despite all the creepy stories I'd just watched. My apartment was on the third floor of an old brick building, and I always felt pretty safe up there. I was just about to turn off the TV when I heard it. A soft knock at the door. At first I thought I was imagining things. It was so faint that I figured it might have been a neighbor accidentally bumping into my door on their way to their own apartment. It wouldn't have been the first time. The hallways in that building were pretty narrow. I paused my show and listened, but everything was quiet. I was just about to shrug it off when I heard it again, this time a little louder and more deliberate. Now, I'm not usually the paranoid type, but something about this just felt off. Maybe it was all those true crime shows getting to me, but my heart started racing a bit. I muted the TV and slowly got up from the couch, trying not to make any noise. The floorboards in that old apartment had a tendency to creak, and for some reason I didn't want whoever was out there to know I was home. I tiptoed to the door, holding my breath the whole time. My apartment had one of those peepholes, you know, the kind that gives you a fisheye view of the hallway. I leaned in close, cupping my hands around it to block out the light from my apartment. What I saw made my blood run cold. There was a man standing there, and he looked, well, shifty is the best way I can describe it. He was wearing a dark hoodie pulled low over his face, and he kept glancing up and down the hallway like he was worried someone might catch him. I didn't recognize him at all, and trust me, in a building that small, you get to know your neighbors pretty quick. I stood there, frozen, not sure what to do. Should I call out? Pretend I wasn't home? Call the cops? Before I could make up my mind, he knocked again, harder this time. I jumped back from the door, my heart pounding so loud I was sure he could hear it. That's when he started talking. He was saying something about his car breaking down and needing to use a phone. His voice sounded strained, like he was trying to sound friendly but couldn't quite pull it off. I've got to tell you, every instinct I had was screaming that this guy was bad news. I don't know what came over me, but I suddenly found my voice. I shouted through the door that I was calling the cops to help him with his car trouble. I tried to sound confident, like I wasn't scared out of my mind. The change in his demeanor was instant and terrifying. His whole body language shifted, and he started banging on the door, yelling at me to open up. I could hear the anger in his voice, and it was clear that whatever his original plan was, it was out the window now. I scrambled for my phone, nearly dropping it because my hands were shaking so bad. I managed to dial 911 and blurted out my address to the operator. She was calm and reassuring, telling me to find a safe place to hide while they dispatched officers to my location. I ran to my bathroom. It was the only room in the apartment without windows, and it had a sturdy lock on the door. I could still hear the guy outside, alternating between pounding on my front door and yelling threats. The 911 operator stayed on the line with me, which was probably the only thing keeping me from completely losing it. Time seemed to stretch on forever. I was huddled in my bathtub, clutching my phone like a lifeline, straining to hear what was happening outside. After what felt like hours, but was probably only a few minutes, the banging suddenly stopped. The silence that followed was almost worse than the noise. The operator told me to stay put until the police arrived, which I was more than happy to do. A few minutes later, I heard voices in the hallway, and then a knock at my door. The operator confirmed it was the police, and I finally felt like I could breathe again. When I opened the door, there were 2 officers standing there. They did a quick sweep of my apartment and the building, but the guy was long gone. They took my statement and told me that this wasn't the first incident like this in the area. Apparently, it was a common tactic for burglars to knock on doors late at night, claiming to need help. If someone answered, they'd force their way in. If no one answered, they'd know the apartment was empty and break in. The officers were great, really reassuring. They gave me some tips on improving my home security and even waited while I called a friend to come stay with me for the night. I was pretty shaken up, and the thought of staying alone in that apartment was more than I could handle. The next few days were rough. I jumped at every little noise, and I couldn't shake the image of that guy's face when he realized I wasn't going to open the door. I ended up taking a few days off work and staying with my parents in the suburbs just to clear my head. When I got back to my apartment, I went all out on security. I installed a new deadbolt, got one of those doorstop alarms, and even put some motion sensor lights in the hallway outside my door, with the landlord's permission, of course. I also started getting to know my neighbors better. We set up a group chat to keep each other informed about any suspicious activity in the building. Looking back, I realize how lucky I was. If I hadn't trusted my gut and had opened that door, who knows what could have happened. It's scary to think about, but it also taught me some valuable lessons about personal safety and being aware of my surroundings. The incident sparked a sort of neighborhood watch in our area. We had a community meeting where the police came and gave us tips on home security and what to do in situations like mine. It was comforting to see how everyone came together, looking out for each other. I ended up staying in that apartment for another year before moving to a more secure building. But I never forgot that night or the lessons it taught me. It's easy to think that nothing bad will ever happen to you, but the truth is you never know. Being prepared and trusting your instincts can make all the difference. I also got really into self-defense classes. Not because I wanted to become a ninja or anything, but because it helped me feel more confident and in control. The classes were a great way to work through some of the anxiety I was feeling and meet other people who had been through similar experiences. This crazy thing happened to me a couple of years ago when I was living in Houston. I had this nice little house in the Montrose area, not too far from the museum district. It was an older place, full of character, but also full of quirks. You know how those vintage homes can be. Anyway, I'd been dealing with this pesky, leaky pipe under my kitchen sink for a while. It wasn't a major problem, just annoying, and I finally decided to get it fixed. I'm not much of a DIY person, especially when it comes to plumbing, so I called up this local handyman service that had good reviews online. They said they could send someone over around noon, which was perfect because I had the day off work. I spent the morning tidying up the house. Not that it was super messy, but you know how it is when you're expecting company, even if it's just a repair person. Noon came and went, and no handyman. I wasn't too worried at first. These things happen, right? But as the clock ticked past 1 p.m., then 2 p.m., I started to get a bit annoyed. I tried calling the service, but it went straight to voicemail. Great customer service, I thought. So there I was, stuck at home, waiting for this no-show handyman. I tried to make the best of it, catching up on some reading and doing a bit of work from home. It was one of those hot, humid Houston summer days, and I had the AC cranked up, feeling grateful I wasn't stuck outside in the heat. Around 3 p.m., just when I was about to give up and call it a day, I heard the doorbell ring. Finally, I thought. I wasn't even that annoyed anymore. I was just glad someone had shown up to fix the darn sink. I opened the door, and sure enough, there was a guy standing there in overalls, toolbox in hand. He looked the part, a bit scruffy, maybe in his mid-40s, with that kind of weathered look you'd expect from someone who works with their hands. I didn't think twice about it. I was just relieved he was there. I let him in and showed him to the kitchen. He seemed nice enough, apologizing for being late and blaming it on Houston traffic, which, let's be honest, is a pretty valid excuse in this city. I told him it was no big deal and left him to his work while I went back to my laptop in the living room. I could hear him tinkering around under the sink, the clanking of tools and the occasional muffled curse word that made me chuckle. It all seemed pretty normal, and I started to relax, thinking I'd have a functional sink by dinner time. After about 30 minutes, he called out to me, asking if he could use the bathroom. Of course, I said yes. It's a basic courtesy, right? I told him it was upstairs, second door on the left. He thanked me and headed up, and I went back to my work, not thinking much of it. But then time started to stretch on. 5 minutes passed, then 10. At first, I tried to brush it off. Maybe the guy had stomach issues or something. Who was I to judge? But as it crept past the 15-minute mark, I started to get this uneasy feeling in the pit of my stomach. I tried to focus on my work, but I couldn't shake this nagging sense that something wasn't right. I found myself straining to hear any sound from upstairs, but the house was eerily quiet. Finally, after about 20 minutes, I decided I needed to check things out. I called up the stairs, asking if everything was okay. No response. The silence was really starting to freak me out now. I slowly made my way up the stairs, my heart pounding in my chest. I noticed the bathroom door was open, and it was empty. That's when I heard it. A soft, shuffling sound coming from my bedroom. My blood ran cold. I knew I should probably just run, call the cops, do anything other than investigate. But curiosity and disbelief got the better of me. I crept towards my bedroom, trying to be as quiet as possible. The door was partially open, and I could see movement inside. I pushed it open wider, and there he was, the handyman, standing in front of my dresser, rifling through my stuff. He had my jewelry box open and was pocketing things left and right. For a moment, we just stared at each other, both of us frozen in shock. Then, as if a switch had been flipped, we both sprang into action. He started spouting some nonsense about looking for the main water valve, but I wasn't buying it. I grabbed my phone from my pocket and told him I was calling the police. The change in his demeanor was instant and terrifying. The friendly, apologetic handyman act vanished, replaced by a look of anger and desperation. He lunged towards me, and I panicked. I threw my phone at him, not my smartest move, I know, and ran. I bolted down the stairs, my mind racing. I could hear him behind me, his heavy footsteps thundering down. I ran straight for the front door, fumbling with the lock in my panic. Just as I got it open, I felt his hand grab my shoulder. In that moment, pure adrenaline took over. I whirled around and, without thinking, kneed him as hard as I could. I guess all those self-defense classes my mom made me take in college paid off because he doubled over in pain. I used that moment to shove him back and run out the door. I ran down the street, screaming for help. A couple of my neighbors were outside, and they came running when they saw me. I was babbling, trying to explain what happened. One of them, Mike, who's built like a linebacker, immediately headed towards my house with another neighbor. The handyman must have seen them coming because he bolted out the back door and over the fence. It all happened so fast, but it felt like time was moving in slow motion. My neighbors called the police while I stood there, shaking like a leaf. The cops arrived pretty quickly, one of the perks of living in a decent neighborhood, I guess. I gave my statement to the police, trying to remember every detail I could about the guy. They took a look around my house, but of course, he was long gone. They told me he had probably been casing the neighborhood, looking for easy targets. The fact that he knew I was expecting a handyman meant he might have been monitoring my calls or had an inside source at the repair company. The real handyman showed up about an hour later, completely oblivious to the drama that had unfolded. Turns out, he'd gotten the date mixed up and thought the appointment was for the next day. I didn't even care about the leak anymore. I was just glad it wasn't another imposter. The next few days were a blur of police reports changing locks and installing a new security system. My neighbors were amazing, checking in on me and even taking turns staying with me for a few nights until I felt safe again. In the weeks that followed, I became a bit of a security nut. I researched everything I could about home safety and implemented pretty much every recommendation I found. I installed motion sensor lights all around the house, got a video doorbell, and even adopted a big, loud dog from the local shelter. Okay, the dog was as much for companionship as for security, but still. The police never caught the guy, which was frustrating. But they did tell me that reports of similar incidents in the area decreased after I raised the alarm. Apparently, the increased awareness and security measures in the neighborhood made it less attractive to would-be burglars. So at least some good came out of my scary experience. I still live in the same house. At first I thought about moving, worried that the memories would be too much. But this is my home. And I refuse to let one bad experience take that away from me. Instead, I've reclaimed it, filling it with new, happy memories with friends and family. This wild thing happened to me a while back when I was living in Seattle. I had this cute little townhouse in the Ballard neighborhood, not too far from the locks. It was a great area, lots of cool shops and restaurants, and I loved being able to walk down to the water on nice days. I'd been living there for about a year, and I was finally starting to feel settled in. You know how it is when you move to a new city? It takes a while to really feel at home. But I had my routine down, favorite coffee shops picked out, even made a few friends in the area. Life was pretty good. Anyway, it was early spring, and Seattle was having one of those rare, gloriously sunny days. The kind where everyone comes out of hibernation and you can practically feel the whole city buzzing with energy. I'd been cooped up all winter, working long hours at my tech job downtown, so I decided to take advantage of the weather and work from home. I set up my laptop on the kitchen table, which had a nice view of the street. I could see my neighbors out walking their dogs, kids riding bikes. Just a perfect Seattle spring day. I was feeling pretty good, sipping my coffee and actually enjoying answering work emails for once. It was around mid-morning when I first noticed him. There was a guy outside moving from house to house with what looked like window cleaning supplies. At first, I didn't think much of it. Our townhouse complex was managed by a property company, and they were always sending people around to do maintenance stuff. But as I watched him work his way down the street, something started to feel off. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but something about the way he moved, the way he kept looking around, just didn't sit right with me. He wasn't cleaning the windows very thoroughly, for one thing. It was more like he was just going through the motions, his attention more on the houses than on his work. I tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself I was being paranoid. Maybe the guy was just new at his job or having a bad day. but I couldn't help keeping an eye on him as he made his way closer to my place. When he finally reached my townhouse, I decided I should probably check things out. I mean, I hadn't received any notice about window cleaning, and usually, the property management was pretty good about letting us know when workers would be around. I stepped outside, trying to look casual, like I was just coming out to enjoy the sunshine. The guy saw me and gave me a friendly wave. He looked normal enough, maybe in his early 30s, average height and build, wearing a generic uniform that could have belonged to any maintenance company. I waved back and asked him what he was up to. He explained that the property management had sent him to clean the windows and do some general exterior maintenance. His story sounded plausible, and he seemed friendly enough, but something still felt wrong. Maybe it was the way his eyes kept darting around, never quite meeting mine. Or the way he seemed more interested in looking past me into my house than in the conversation we were having. He started asking questions that at first seemed like casual small talk, but quickly veered into territory that made me uncomfortable. He wanted to know if I lived alone, what my work schedule was like, if I traveled much. Red flags were going up all over the place in my mind. I tried to keep my answers vague and non-committal, but he was persistent. I told him I needed to check with the property management office to confirm the work order. I tried to sound casual about it, like it was just a formality, but my heart was racing. The guy's demeanor changed instantly. He got this look on his face, a mix of anger and something else, something that made my skin crawl. I didn't wait for his response. I turned and went back inside, locking the door behind me. My hands were shaking as I grabbed my phone and called the property management office. The receptionist confirmed what I'd already started to suspect. They hadn't sent anyone to clean windows or do any kind of maintenance that day. My mind was reeling. I peeked out the window, but the guy was gone. Vanished just like that. I didn't know if that made me feel better or worse. I called the police non-emergency line and reported what had happened. They took my information and said they'd send a patrol car to check the area. I spent the rest of the day in a state of high alert, jumping at every little noise. I kept replaying the conversation in my head, thinking about all the information I'd inadvertently given him. I realized how easy it had been for him to get me talking, how quickly he'd been able to find out things about me that a burglar or worse could use. That night, I barely slept. I kept getting up to check the locks, peering out the windows into the darkness. Every creak and groan of the house settling made me tense up. It was like all the comfort and security I'd felt in my home had evaporated in a single day. The next morning, I was exhausted but determined to do something. I couldn't just sit around feeling scared in my own home. I started by talking to my neighbors, asking if they'd seen the guy or had any similar experiences. To my surprise, several of them had noticed him too, but like me, they'd assumed he was legitimate. One of my neighbors, an older lady who'd lived in the area for decades, mentioned that there had been a string of burglaries in nearby neighborhoods. She'd read about it in the local community paper. Apparently, the burglars had been using various disguises to case houses, posing as delivery drivers, utility workers, and yes, window cleaners. Hearing this lit a fire under me. I started doing research, looking up recent crime reports in the area, reading everything I could find about home security. I discovered that what had happened to me was a pretty common tactic. Burglars would pose as workers to scout out potential targets, gathering information about residents' schedules and what valuables they might have. I decided to take action. First, I upgraded my home security. I installed a video doorbell, put in some smart locks, and set up a security camera system. It was a bit pricey, but the peace of mind was worth every penny. I also started paying more attention to my surroundings, making a mental note of unfamiliar cars or people hanging around the neighborhood. But I didn't stop there. I realized that individual action wasn't enough. We needed to come together as a community to really make a difference. I reached out to my neighbors and proposed starting a neighborhood watch program. The response was overwhelming. It turned out a lot of people had been feeling uneasy but didn't know what to do about it. We had our first meeting at my place. It was amazing to see my living room filled with neighbors, many of whom I'd only ever exchanged casual hellos with before. We shared our experiences, our concerns, and our ideas for making our neighborhood safer. One of my neighbors, a retired cop, gave us some great tips on what to look out for and how to report suspicious activity. Another neighbor who worked in IT helped us set up a group chat where we could quickly share information and alerts. We made plans for community events to help everyone get to know each other better, figuring that a tight-knit community would be a less attractive target for criminals. About a month after the incident, we had a breakthrough. One of my neighbors spotted a guy who matched the description of our fake window cleaner. He was using a different disguise this time, posing as a door-to-door salesman, but the neighbor recognized his face from the description I'd given. We alerted the police immediately, and this time they caught him. It turned out he was part of a larger burglary ring that had been operating in the Seattle area for months. The information we'd gathered as a community had been crucial in helping the police connect the dots and make the arrest. I still live in the same townhouse, and every time I look out at the street, I think about that day. Not with fear, but with a sense of pride in how we all came together, how we turned a frightening experience into an opportunity for positive change. That fake window cleaner thought he was just scouting for an easy target that day. He had no idea that his actions would end up bringing an entire community together, making us stronger and safer than we'd ever been before. In a weird way, I'm almost grateful for the wake-up call. Thank you for watching. If you found these stories gripping, don't forget to subscribe for more spine-tingling content. For another hair-raising tale, check out our suggested video. And if you're hungry for more eerie encounters, dive into our playlist featuring similar chilling narratives.